message is very, very simple. We want to educate the kids, not indoctrinate them.
She doesn't want these projects in her backyard, in Warringah. She wants them in yours.
What's wrong with Australia today?
For me, it's leadership. There's just a lack of leadership.
We should be energy independent here in Australia. We've got everything.
And it's good to see the community come out and really engage in this issue of parental rights.
You only have one vote, but it's very powerful.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp. Thank you everyone that are watching live on Rumble, YouTube, and Facebook. If you can't join us live, then you can watch our episodes again on Rumble. Rumble's the best place to go. You can find all that information in the show notes, all the links to our social media and everything like that. We will be taking comments on today's episode, and also at some point I'll put the link in the chat so you can call in. I think I really want to encourage people to call in and make a comment or ask a question. I mean, getting feedback from the audience is really important, especially when we discuss certain issues that might have a different slant on things. It's really good to get people's feedback just to see how you guys are feeling and what you guys are thinking, and whether we're on the right track or whether we need to think about things a little bit more or not. So I encourage people to call in today if you can. You can use your laptop, you can use your phone. It's just a simple link. You don't need to download anything. It's very, very easy. So I'll put that link in the chat at some point today. I also want to let everyone know quickly about Buy Me a Coffee. If you want to jump on to Buy Me a Coffee to support what we're doing here at Commanding the Narrative, you can. It's buymeacoffee.com/commanding the narrative. Now, this week we had Katie McCallum. She bought us 5 coffees, and she left a very, very nice comment. She wrote, Joe Rogan, Dan Crenshaw, the UFO rabbit hole, and Need to Know were the only podcasts that ever played in my car. But now I've discovered Commanding the Narrative and the Ex-Candidates. All those other podcasts have been knocked down the playlist. Your interviews are honestly the best. I get in the car at 3:30 a.m. every morning. Katie, I don't know what you're doing in the car at 3 a.m. in the morning, but that's brutal. And the first thing I do before I put the car in drive is make sure I got a Commanding the Narrative or Ex-Candidates episode queued up and ready to go. So thank you very much, Katie, for that lovely comment, and for also sending through those 5 coffees. It's much appreciated. I mean, every time someone donates to us on Buy Me a Coffee, it blows me away, especially in the cost of living crisis, that people want to part with their hard-earned money to show us some support here on Commanding the Narrative. It's very, very nice, and it's very much appreciated as well. But I also want to let you know as well, just quickly before we get to our special guest today, we also have official merchandise now. So if you want to get your Ex-Candidates or Commanding the Narrative t-shirts, you can head to excandidates.tshirts.net.au. Again, I'll put that link in the show notes. If you want to get your Commanding the Narrative or Ex-Candidates t-shirts, we will start putting up more and more designs as we go along. But check that out if you can. Sorry, I just noticed that the Facebook is playing up for some reason. We should be live on Facebook now. This seems to be some technical difficulties going on there with Facebook, but I guess that's just what happens. But on today's episode, we got a guest returning. He was on the Ex-Candidates back on episode 99, but I thought I'd have him on Commanding the Narrative today because he's written 2 very important articles. One on informed consent, and also another one on cash and how the banks are removing ATMs from existence, really. I mean, there's been a sharp drop in ATMs around the country. So let's bring him on. Victor DL, welcome to Commanding the Narrative, my friend.
Thank you very much for having me back on. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure to have you. So you've written these articles that we'll get to in a moment, but you're also a podcaster as well. Are you still going strong with the podcast?
Definitely an amateur podcaster compared to you guys. But no, I'm still chugging along really well with it. To me, it's a bit of a self-indulgence. I get some really awesome guests on that in my everyday life I would never have the experience of meeting and chatting with. So that's one of the really good things that about doing a podcast. So yeah, that's still going really well. Still experimenting with different formats, trying to do some comedy stuff, trying to mix it in with the serious stuff, and just seeing how it goes. But it's really interesting because when I started the podcast, and the reason I started the podcast was because everybody told me that nobody reads anything online anymore. And, you know, my background is academic researcher, and what I do is I write. So I actually went 18 months like struggling behind the scenes doing the podcasting. And, you know, like I had a little bit of success. It's very slow drip, and I'm very proud of it, and I'm happy with where I'm at. But then I think it was actually you the last time that we chatted that suggested I just try writing some articles and just putting them out there. And I took your advice, and I just cannot believe just how gangbusters both the articles have gone. I never in a million years, either in my academic world or just in my everyday world, would imagine that I would get published in the US. And so the last 2 weeks, having written these 2 articles, has been an absolute insane whirlwind. It really has. So yeah, thank you to your suggestion to me to start writing, and also just for your ongoing support.
No, look, I like to see people succeed. I mean, that's it's very important thing. People get jealous of other people and they want to keep them down. I'm the total opposite. I want to bring people up and encourage them and motivate them and support them in any way that I can, because if I can build other people up, then they can build me up, and it's a continual growth sort of thing. Plus, I mean, I do have a little bit of competitiveness in me as well. So when I see someone else succeed, it motivates me to try harder as well. So it's all very important. But this article that you've written, it got published, as you said, in America, the Brownstone Institute. I haven't heard of the Brownstone Institute before. Can you tell us a little bit about this website and what they're doing there?
So I would say that the Brownstone is like that, one of those sites that it's a happy medium between like more of your commercial everyday news site and academic kind of journals. So it's like a happy halfway. So I found that a lot of the people that write there have an academic background, but they're talking about and writing on issues that you can't really get traction in academia. But it's designed, and the way that the articles are written, there is some long form stuff, but they're generally like really accessible. And it's written in, they're a little bit shorter, certainly, than journal articles as well. But it's what I really like about it is it's not treating us, the viewer, like we're stupid, like the 9MSN and all of those sort of rubbish websites do. It's accepting that the audience is educated. They have a good understanding of the issues and the important issues, and we write for that they write for that sort of audience. The guy that started it because of he was just completely taken back by what was happening during COVID, and he saw a lot of academics and a lot of people online with really strong scientific backgrounds, medicine backgrounds, being cancelled and banned, and he kind of wanted to create a space where those people could still publish. His name's Jeremy. I'm so sorry right now. His surname's escaping me, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing about the internet. There's all these incredible resources that you can find that you may not even know about. So there's plenty of information out there from, as you said, academics that are looking for somewhere to post their content. And what I find about your writing is that it's fearless. So maybe that's why you've had the success that you've had this week, because you're willing to confront issues that a lot of people would probably shy away from. If we're talking about informed consent that you spoke about in this article, in the Brownstone article, but you also got it published in the Spectator Australia as well. So
yeah,
not only did you get published in America, but you also got published here in Australia. You start off in the first line of the article by saying, In a significant blow to patient autonomy, informed consent has been quietly revoked just 77 years after it was codified in the Nuremberg Code. I mean, that's pretty. I mean, that's way out there. You wouldn't even have imagined that only a few years ago. Can you expand on that a little bit? What does this mean? What does this mean that that it's been revoked after 77 years?
Yeah, so I think some of the tone within the article came about because of my frustration, but also my surprise that no one really was covering this topic at all. It came up in January on my Twitter feed, and it came and went like that because I think when it comes to Twitter, for me, it's important to not only follow the people that I love and that I agree with, but also I try to keep across what everyone else is up to, if you know what I mean. And so when I looked into it, I realized that when they were talking about revoking informed consent, it was something that was written into the original act from 2016 that they wanted to get rid of informed consent. They announced that they were going to consider this amendment in September last year. And again, that received very little notification in mainstream media and very little online chatter about it at all. And then when I looked into a little bit more, I realized that they had put the change into effect and discussed it on the 21st of December. So while everyone was very distracted with the festive season, Christmas, New Year, a lot of us are on holidays, no one was really looking. And that's what a lot of these places do. You know, we talk about in politics how they dump it at like 11 p.m. on a Friday evening because they know that the weekend papers are already published, the news is already sorted. This to me really like stunk of that sort of, let's hide it at Christmas and no one's going to notice it. But the most insipid part was it was ruled and signed into law on the 21st of December, 2023. It came into effect less than a month, or exactly a month later, on the 22nd of January 2024. And the wording of, I don't want to like bore people too much, but the wording is basically saying that they no longer require informed consent for what the FDA considers minimal risk clinical interventions, or sorry, investigations. So the reason that this kind of put my hairs up on the back of my neck is previously, the only reason you could get an exemption for informed consent was literally with a presidential waiver, or if it was part of essential military operations, or if it was for obviously life-threatening situations where the person was unable to give informed consent and their life hung in the balance. Obviously, you want people to act, emergency room sort of situations. So it's a pretty big deal. Like to override something that previously only in extreme military sort of maneuvers situations, life-threatening situations, or with a presidential waiver, they just secretly and very quietly signed off. So as I said at the outset, I was not someone that was really writing very much, but I wrote up a script to do like a short video essay on it. And I actually got very busy, as I think we've discussed previously, in December, January, February. So I wasn't able to do that. And after our discussion, I remember I had that script there and I thought, well, I'm just going to check out and see what sort of coverage this got. And I went to all my usual places and the answer was it just got zero attention. I was completely shocked by that. So then I thought, I'm just going to write this article up. And yeah, actually, it's funny that you say about the wording because we had to do some editing because it was actually a little bit more aggressively worded than what it turned out to be. I was really happy with how it turned out. I got some people, a very interesting point actually was I got some people from the other side. I don't really like this idea of sides, but at least people, when I say that, they know who I'm talking about.
You're talking about the left side of politics?
Yeah, and this person in particular was very pro-COVID. So this was very interesting to me. I said to you off camera that I made the mistake of putting my email, attaching my email to that article, which don't ever do that. But amongst all, not all, but a lot of the crazy, there were some very very good emails. And one of them was from this guy that said, look, I never really thought about this during COVID, but I really agree with everything you said in the article, but I'll let you know that the last paragraph, you lost me. And that was where I was talking about that it's going to be implemented by the same groupthink cultists who were responsible for the worst lockdown measures during the pandemic. Again,
you're right.
It was a watered down version of what I had originally written. But it was, but what,
Well,
what
I mean,
delivering
delivering this stuff in a podcast and then writing an article are two very separate delivery. You know, you need to be a little bit more forceful on a podcast, I suppose.
Yeah, I was just, I mean, I understand how the online world works. So I wanted to include something that was going to deliberately be a little bit controversial because I did want that argument to happen. And I also knew that first sentence that you read out, that was absolutely critical because as anyone on social media knows, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, when they do like the promotion and the capture, it's generally the title and then that first sentence that people read. And look, a lot of people just read that title and that subtitle, and that is the impetus to share. And I'm not going to be I'm going to be angry with someone just because they only read the title and subtitle and decide to share. That's ultimately what we need, because then that will hopefully get more people to click on it. But that's why I kind of started strong and finished strong.
Well, during the pandemic, the Nuremberg Code was something that people instinctively went to as a defense, and it didn't quite work. But to think that it's been revoked is huge news in my opinion, because you know, it is meant to be a safety net for these sorts of issues. But I guess we need to make clear that this is American legislation. It is the 21st Century Cures Act. It was passed in America, but as you stated in the article, what often happens in America comes to Australia very quickly. So we need to be on guard for this sort of stuff. And you go on to write that the Act supports high risk, high reward research.
Yeah.
Well, that could include anything. I mean, high risk, high reward.
So just to be clear, the original act that was put out was very controversial because it was co-sponsored by a lot of large pharmaceutical companies. And very strangely, it was one of the last acts that Obama signed in before he left office. So because some people have tried to link this to Trump, but it's Obama, 100%. Obama was the one that signed this in. It was a very controversial act. So we're going back to 2016. What you read out were provisions within the act, and they wanted to specifically focus on, and you got the wording right, high risk, high reward research, as well as novel clinical trial designs, as well as encouraging vaccine innovation. So that was in 2016. So what I kind of read out almost seems like a rule book for what happened 4 years later, or what resulted 4 years later. It was just extraordinary that it was just written there for anyone to just read. And so this is, by the way, this is for people, for organizations such as the NIH, CDC, FDA.
So what you're saying was this was in place before the COVID pandemic?
That's right. So these things were all passed into law as part of the 21st Century Cures Act. So that was in 2016. So this became, I guess in Australian terms, this became like policy. And so it basically gave the green light to the NIH in particular, because that's where the bulk of the money went. And it was not a small chunk of change. It was billions of dollars. And they were basically saying to the scientists, because the idea behind the act is the science, the people in science, the people in pharmaceuticals, they were frustrated because of all these rules in place to protect the consumer and the participant within scientific studies. So the whole idea of the act was to try and loosen and deregulate a lot of this to make it quicker and easier. So part of that was the provision that they wanted universities, institutes, the NIH and Big Pharma, and they were encouraging them to do high risk, high reward. And they were encouraging them to do novel clinical trials. So it was literally written into their legislation.
It blows me away because under normal circumstances, I mean, high risk. That it's completely unnecessary.
Well, it completely and the thing about when you read through the act, and I will say this about the US, when they write up an act or legislation, it is very accessible for the lay person who doesn't do law. And I don't know if we'll get time to discuss this, but I looked into, in prep for today, the Australian Digital ID Act that was passed through Senate very, very quickly the other day. Now, that with its associated paperwork was over 400 pages long and reads like a word salad. It's almost impossible to decipher. The US, at least, make things a little bit easier and a little bit more accessible to kind of get into.
Yeah.
I forget your question.
We will definitely talk about the digital ID because that is a massive issue. We'll probably discuss that at the end. So stick around for that one. But one of the lines that you picked up on in this legislation was appropriate safeguards to protect the rights, safety, and welfare of human subjects. How do you feel being identified as a subject?
Well, no, I don't like it. But that was the point I was going to make to your previous question. When you read through the Act, the 21st Century Cures Act in the US, that there's really no mention of the individual, of the citizen, of the human. So it's talking about these experiments. It's talking about clinical trials as if they kind of exist outside of us, the citizens. So I found that very insipid. And then when they start to talk about subjects, obviously the word subject comes from subjugation. So someone who is submissive to a higher power. And in general, the general public look at doctors and scientists, health bureaucrats, politicians as being an authority figure. So they're generally, as we saw during COVID, quite compliant with what they say. So I found that word very troubling because they could have chosen persons, individuals, participants, citizens, people, anything that was a little bit more human. But to speak about us as subjects kind of leads me to where their thinking is actually at.
Well, that's what you say here. You say the term, the use of the term subjects also serves to dehumanize. So,
Yeah.
and
Which as I say in the article, it's critical because Hannah Arendt, who studied the Nazis extensively, she actually spoke about using words like subjects is not accidental. It is deliberate because what it does clearly is dehumanize the person. And her argument is that once that you dehumanize people, and they did this during COVID when they started to talk about things like the greater good of society, the individual gets lost. And what happens is, well, she argues that what happens, and I agree, is that's one of the first ways to start down that pathway of people losing individual and human rights. And that then you just move into very scary territory.
And as you said, a lot of this stuff is happening almost under the cover of darkness because they're pushing these through just before a holiday or at a busy period or on a Friday afternoon or something like that. And where people don't pick up, as you said, I mean, this legislation's gone through and you can't find articles apart from yours talking about it anywhere.
No, and I look, if I'm being modest, I don't think that I wrote anything that was like that extraordinary. I think it was just that I managed to find a very small area of something that is very important to, I think, a lot of people, and it should be important to people, that no one else was talking about. And to get back to you're talking about the Nuremberg Code, one of the things that they also talk about when they're talking about the dangers of dehumanizing people is that they ruled, and it was the #1 principle of the Nuremberg Code, and that was that voluntary consent of humans is essential. And further to that, which a lot of people rarely ever get down to number 9. There's only 10. But number 9 is actually really important, I think, as well, because that is talking about the ability of us, that if we are part of something, whether we're, say, for example, the mandates, there's actually the provision there that says that we have the right and the liberty to remove ourselves from anything that we don't want to be a part of. So and that's important because if you're talking about taking away informed consent, then potentially you're talking about someone having something done to them within the environment that they're actually not aware of, so they can't voluntarily remove themselves from that participation. And that's where it starts to get a little bit scary. And I talk about this because some of the pushback on the article was like, well, they're only talking about minimal risk. Well, there's a couple of things there. The first thing about minimal risk is who decides what that minimal risk is? This is the most insane part. They do. Their internal ethics departments, and all of them have it in the FDA, the CDC, and the NIH. They all have their own ethics department. So their own employees are the ones who are responsible for defining what minimal risk is. And it's not just things like surveys. It does include invasive procedures. And then what my argument is this might be only small, but how many times have you seen the government start small and they kind of scratch the surface? And if they can get away with that one first small step, which they seemingly have done this time because no one's pushed back on this other than me, then they start to push the boundaries a little bit more. And if you want to go back to the COVID thing, one of the things with the vaccines then is they obviously called them safe and effective. And so that was their definition. So you have to wonder where that would fall in terms of like risk assessment. Would they have considered the vaccines minimal risk, moderate risk, high risk? I mean, not according to us, but according to their own department, I would think that they would have classified them as minimal risk.
Well, you still have politicians like Katie Gallagher, for example. I've got a clip to play of her later. And she's still running with the line that vaccines are safe and effective and all this sort of stuff, with all the information that we know coming out about that. So, and this is what the people...
These politicians are that she's dangerous. To say that, I mean, we're living in a world where they just have buried. She is completely buried her head in the sand. It's extraordinary to me that we can have a situation where countries in Europe have banned them wholesale, and we're still recommending them. And she's not acknowledging anything, even just side effects.
I always think
it's dangerous.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely dangerous, and I always think about these issues politically. I always go politically first because, at the end of the day, these issues are political because it's legislation going through Parliament. So how else do you tackle these issues? And I often think, like in America, Australia, the United Kingdom, other countries that are similar to us around the world, it's meant to be representative government where the politicians in the Parliament are representing us. But when do any of these decisions and legislation, when are they ever taken to the public? When does a politician or a leader ever get up and say, hey, we're going to pass this law to revoke the informed consent that was protected by the Nuremberg Code? We're going to go and do that. It is never taken to the people. It is never taken to an election. It's never taken to a plebiscite or any mechanism that could stop this, or at least gives the people a chance to say, no, we don't want this. This is not in our best interest, and we don't want any part of it. That never ever happens.
This is why it is so important to hold people that were responsible for the most dystopian and unscientific elements of the COVID lockdowns and during the pandemic wholesale, hold those people to account. Because what's actually happened is those people have seen what went on, and they're actually feeling emboldened. And actually a lot of those people got promoted. And this, to me, is the logical next outcome from not holding people responsible for what they did during COVID. Because they got away with it.
Yeah. And they can just keep pushing and pushing and pushing for the next thing. I mean, this raises something else that you've written here in this article. It says, or you've written, this ruling also allows researchers and their backers to pursue potentially dangerous experimental programs such as mosquito vaccines, mRNA vaccines in livestock, and vaccines in aerosols. Now, all of those sound horrific to me, but I want to focus more on the aerosol part. If you're going to have vaccines in aerosols and then you're going to remove informed consent, well, what's to stop them from loading up an aircraft with this stuff and spraying it over the population? I mean, is that far-fetched to think that way?
No, it's not. So the onus will be on the pharmaceutical company or the university to prove beyond doubt to the FDA's ethics department that what they are suggesting and what they are proposing is only poses a minimal risk to the population. So it's not at all, because part of the minimum risk amendment, they actually spoke about environmental stuff. They speak more specifically about observation, but observation of what, it's very vague. They don't actually state. So because, and this is why the original act was so controversial, this is why this amendment is so controversial, is because it is largely sponsored by Big Pharma. And as I said, if they can just prove, as they have done rather recently, the ability to, well, if we're being kind, we could say hoodwink the FDA, then proving it's low risk is not very difficult to do. So particularly if you're like in a phase 2 or phase 3 trial and you've done it on animals and none of the animals died, and they would say something probably along the lines of they would start with a very low concentration. But, you know, you're talking about like in planes, but, you know, a lot of people in their homes, they have those things on the wall that spray like scent when you walk past it. It's not inconceivable that if you were to visit, say, a doctor's practice or a hospital or something along those lines, that they could put something into the air that they could argue is protecting patients, protecting the vulnerable, and you would normally have to consent to that, or there have to be something like on the front door to say when you enter these premises, and all the rules. They don't even have to do that. So
that's a
the potential
point
for that, and that's why I was very careful there with my wording to say potentially. But ultimately, if you draw this out over years, and people get lax, and people get and organisations get more captured, you get the right sort of corrupt individual who's
yes. I mean,
these sort of things. It's not inconceivable to me that all of these things could happen and happen very quickly.
You just need to go back to when modern civilization, and I'm talking about America, Australia, and in some regard the UK, it was to safeguard against the tyrants and the crazy people who often get in control throughout human history. You don't remove safeguards because you get crazy people, and you can point to a whole, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, the list goes on of people that are able to siege control.
Yeah,
and where's the safeguard from stopping them from doing these things? And you think it's far.
And the Americans know that, and it's quite interesting because one of the people who emailed me a quote from Ronald Reagan in 1986 when he was president, and he was quoted as saying, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help."
That's right.
So this is something that we've always known, but it just seems, I don't know what's happened with the population, whether people have got PTSD or something strange happened during COVID where Big Pharma went from villain to hero. Politicians went from being like really disliked and distrusted to like mum and dad figures who needed to protect us. And that, I don't know if it's goodwill or what it is, they're running with that. So that, that old saying, you give them an inch and they will take a mile, then they're currently behind the scenes taking a mile. and it's happening all over the place. And what I really liked when you sent me the invitation about today was how you encapsulated everything, that the articles and everything I've been kind of talking about as being an assault on sovereignty, and it really is. And it's not an accident. It is all deliberate. It's coordinated.
We brought up Katie Gallagher, and I might play this clip now because it might fit in with what we're speaking about. This was Malcolm Roberts in the Senate asking Katie Gallagher a question.
Do you acknowledge that human rights were ignored as part of the Commonwealth response to COVID?
Oh, thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Roberts for the question. I note the court case, the decision that's being made. I think in times of emergency, a pandemic, a 1 in 100-year pandemic, decisions that state governments and the Commonwealth government took were difficult, and they balanced up, as is always the case with human rights, they balanced up a range of factors when landing on making those decisions. You know, that is always the case. Human rights are not absolute. They are seen in.
Can you believe you just said that? Human rights are not absolute.
Yeah, I literally just wrote that down. Yeah. The other thing I found quite offensive was the lady in the right laughing her head off throughout the whole thing. It's absolutely extraordinary. And I just want to again reiterate that these people had, as early as March 2020, knowledge that it was not that the virus itself, when it came to young, healthy individuals, and by young, I mean anyone under the age of 65, that it was not dangerous. There's also come to light that they had studies about its effects on children as early as April 2020, in the sense that it was not really going to harm children who did not have multiple comorbidities and were not on medication and not immune compromised. So they had that in 2020.
Scott Morrison, I mean, Alan Jones brings up this all the time, and I haven't got the quote ready, but Scott Morrison went out there and said for the majority of people, this is going to be a flu and it will pass.
Yes,
and it will probably be it will probably be mild. So, I mean, but fancy her saying human rights are not absolute.
Yeah.
They should be absolute, right? Well, I mean, human rights should be sacrosanct.
I find that particular wording quite interesting, because that is almost the exact wording that the WHO uses when they're referring to their international human rights amendments that are probably going to be passed in May this year. So as you're probably aware, the previous document, which was from 2015, I think it is, they mention throughout the document human rights. And that has either been altered or just completely removed. And part of their justification is that human rights are not absolute, and they acknowledge that in order to protect the greater good, that sometimes human rights will have to be paused. I don't know their exact word, but this new idea that things like informed consent, human rights, sovereignty of the individual is like this flexible thing that can be manipulated at the whims of government is truly terrifying.
We seem to have lost all concept of humanity and individual sovereignty. Now, you said before, is it complacency? Is it? I want to bring up religion. I'm not religious. I don't know if you are or not. But I just feel if a politician's standing up there and they have a religious core about them, where they really believe that there's a God or a higher power and they're serving that God, they would never say something like human rights are not absolute, because they believe that every individual is a creation of God. And you know, we know all this. We know what religious people believe. But do you think that that due to the decline in especially Christianity here in Australia, it's opened up the door for this way of thinking, where we've moved away from protecting individuals and protecting sovereignty and having safeguards in place that might not be comfortable, but they're necessary. But since the pandemic, we've completely moved away from that. And even as you said, some of this legislation is before the pandemic. It was in place pre-pandemic. Do you think that religion and the decline of religion has a role here, as a
Yes.
part to play?
Yes, I do. Because I feel like religion and a common history is like the base of society. So we as a population, when you're talking about millions of people, and in America you're talking about hundreds of millions of people, one of the only ways to kind of get a coherent population or civilization is to have at the base of everything a common story, a common narrative, and that has traditionally been in Western countries, that has been Christianity. And what happens when you remove that and then you fracture everyone's attention and then you take like a Christian-focused history out of schools is you end up with everyone kind of existing like a little island with nothing in common anymore. And people are kind of rudderless. And then what kind of happened during COVID is almost like a new orthodoxy, I would say almost like a cult came along, and that was the worship of science. But that is a very fragile foundation in which to put all your beliefs. And that is why people have been so crazy in their defense of just insane policies and science that has proven to be incorrect or was never actually science in the first place. The politicians just used that. So the replacing of this common narrative of a religion, and you don't even have to be overly religious, you just have to have this common understanding of a shared history, a shared purpose, and a coming together of people. But I believe the global elites have deliberately gone about fracturing any commonality between populations, and it's not just being done at the macro level at religion, it's being done, you know, very much at the micro level as well. They're trying to destroy, I mean, even just on a smaller kind of scale is this idea that about Australia Day, a day where all Australians, no matter what background, come together and celebrate this beautiful country in which we live. They're very much attacking that. They come at it from an empathetic and sympathetic point of view because they're Aboriginals, but they don't offer an alternative or anything like that. So, yeah, to answer your question, I think if we're not going to have a common base of Christianity or religion, whatever it may be, then there needs to be something else other than science. Because I can tell you now, speaking to scientists, they don't want it to be science. The idea that science is beyond question is actually anti-science.
Yeah, science is not meant to be
They
absolute.
don't want to be considered a religion. They don't want it to be gospel because they understand that it's progressive. And the only way to actually move science forward is to actually challenge the person before you. And you do it incrementally. You do it in small ways and respectfully in the academic world, and then things progress forward. If you go, no, this is the science as Fauci did, and I am the science, that is actually a full stop period on science. That is saying this is forever. And the other thing about science, as we're learning with this informed consent and the wording around it, subjects, not humans. Religion at least had a basis in humanity. That was the foundation, particularly if you look at the New Testament. And
because you were the creation of God, so that made you divine.
We're made in God's,
you were
exactly.
divine creation. So you couldn't just be a subject. You couldn't be.
And we were all equal.
Yes, exactly.
And what Katie Gallagher was just saying is that actually we're not all equal, because there are some people like her who, she doesn't realize it, but what she's saying is I know better than you.
Yeah.
So you just, and then that politicians who have believed that in the past have led their citizens down to some very dark paths.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's right. But going back to science, that's why they call it science theory, scientific theory. It's not scientific fact, because even Einstein would say this is the best theory that we have until someone else comes along and proves me wrong. That's what science is meant to be. You're not meant to base all your decisions, especially as a society, based on science. I mean, science can be a guide, but it shouldn't be absolute at all.
Yeah, that's one of the things that actually annoys me about these people like that evoke Einstein and George Carlin and all these people that were massively anti-establishment, and while they were alive, were pilloried by the scientific community, and now they're flipping everything about them. Because I'm sure if Einstein was around now, he would not have gone along with the COVID thing. He was a revolution. He was a real rebel, actually.
Yeah, well, I mean, he rebelled against Germany, didn't he? Like that's a big rabbit hole we can go down. But we probably should move to your second article, which is different from informed consent in a lot of ways, but in another way, as we said, as you said, this talk that we're doing today is framed on attacking individual sovereignty. I mean, if you look at it in that way, it's very, very similar. So you wrote this article. It was published in the Spectator. It's called Australia's ATM Extinction. And you bring up some really interesting statistics. Now, you say that we all know that banks are shutting down. The bank that I used to work at in Annandale, is the CBA there is shut down. It's not there anymore. You say around 460 branches have been shut down in the past 3 years, which is significant because in some, especially rural areas, the local bank is accessible or has been accessible to them, and maybe now it's no longer accessible. So that is significant. But what's probably more significant is you say, as of June 2017, there were 13,814 bank-owned ATMs across Australia. 6 years later, in June 2023, there were just 5,693. Now that's a decline of almost 60%. A 60% reduction in ATMs. What's going on there? You say in a bit later in your article, you say, and you're pushing back on the narrative that people are using digital transactions more now, and people are moving away from cash. So that's been a big reason as to why these branches and ATMs have been closing. But you say, and it's almost like the chicken and the egg ratio analogy. You say, what came first, the inability to find an ATM or a natural shift to online services?
Yeah, the thing about looking at anything that has occurred over the last 3 to 4 years, particularly if that activity is an outdoor-based activity, is just fraught with danger. Because particularly in places like Victoria, in Melbourne, Victoria, people were locked into their houses for the best part of 2 years. Yeah. So trying to justify figures around ATM use in Melbourne, Victoria over those 2 years is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Just like it would be ridiculous to look at how many people went to the park or how many people hired a tennis court, because they just were not physically allowed to leave their home. And also in that COVID period, there was a huge effort on behalf of mainstream media. And I'm talking front page of Time magazine. I'm talking front page of local newspapers. Cash is filthy. Cash is dirty. Stop using cash. And when you combine that with the fear of people catching COVID, particularly in the early years, and I believe that businesses also tried to go cashless the first 3 to 6 months of COVID. I do remember that happening.
There's still businesses now. There's still places you walk up to and it says no cash. I really struggle with that, because cash is legal tender. How can you say you're not going to accept legal tender?
That's 100% right, and that's why they were challenged. I believe small businesses are still trying to not allow cash, but I think that issue was that places like Bunnings and Woolworths and some of the big department stores were also not allowing cash. But my point is that that only occurred for about 3 to 6 months, but it only takes about 4 to 6 weeks to change someone's routine or human behavior. So that might have been enough to break that person that would go to the local ATM and withdraw cash. Because they're like, well, I can't use cash anymore. And I think some people still have that mindset that they can't use cash. There's still a lot of people that are very scared that it is dirty, but they used all of banks used all those sort of things as justification for closing down. The other thing that I think is quite insipid that I will add is that there's a very commonly cited figure of 97% of all transactions occur online as opposed to in a branch. But you really need to peel back that stat, because just keep in mind that things like transferring money to a friend who's helped pay for dinner, that's a transaction.
Yes.
Right. And when you think about that, you start to think, well, actually, I do make a lot of transactions online that I probably wouldn't otherwise make, or in the past I would have withdrawn cash. So it's that figure is incredibly misleading, because they're comparing people going into a branch and doing a deposit and checking their bank account with people logging into their app. How many people log into their banking app and do small things like whether it's just a balance check or move things between accounts, like your own personal accounts? That's a transaction. How many people do that on a daily basis? So that 97% of stuff is online is rubbish. It's just that I hate when they do that with stats. It really annoys me.
And if you're paying for something with cash, I mean, is that getting recorded for some businesses? I mean, I'm sure they don't record every single transaction. They're probably legally obliged to, but
I'm a bit dodgy. I think small businesses are doing it hard enough right now, and so like I like to do cash as a way to say, you do with that what you want. I don't care.
Yeah. Well, you brought up ATMs and how they're reducing ATMs. Well, I want to bring up coins because that's probably a little bit lesser known. The Commonwealth Bank specifically, and I don't know so much about the other banks, but I know Commonwealth because I was banking with Commonwealth. Used to be able to go to their machine and withdraw as many coins as you want. I think actually, no, that's not right. I think there was $1,000 limit per day. They stopped that at their coin ATMs and they made it over the counter. But then they said you can only withdraw coins over the counter at $100 with photo ID, and they were going to reduce that to $50. Why? They're a bank. Why can't you withdraw coins? It just seems...
The Commonwealth Bank is the worst of them all. Honestly, it really is. I can't speak to the coins. I know there's been a bit of a war on coins for a while. They got rid of the 1 cent, the 2 cent. They're talking about getting rid of the 5 cent as well. So what that sounds to me is like that was deliberate. To stop people going into the branch, because they did a lot of things that was actually put in place to stop people visiting the branch. So again, they can say, well, no one goes to the branch anymore. But the Commonwealth Bank...
The other dangerous thing is Armaguard, which is apparently they have a monopoly of the whole industry. Armaguard, who delivers the cash and the coins, the notes and the coins to the banks, apparently they're in trouble at the moment. They might be going under.
Yeah. I think they said a maximum of a week. That's all they've got left.
What happens if they go under? Who distributes the cash now?
Well, the Reserve Bank the Reserve Bank of Australia tried to step in and fix it by offering them an extraordinary amount of money. I think it was $24 or $30 million. They turned it down. That's how much trouble they're in. I don't know whether they're playing hardball because, as you said, they've got a monopoly on cash collection and delivery in Australia. If they go down, to answer your question, I don't know what's going to happen to cash collection and delivery. And a lot of people are saying that this is actually quite a deliberate move because it's the next step. So what this is going to do, going back to our what we were saying earlier about why businesses don't accept cash anymore, I think what this is going to do is then the onus is going to be on the business to pay a private security guard to pick up and collect and deliver cash. And let me tell you, with businesses, they can't afford to do that. It's just inconceivable, particularly for small to medium businesses, to think that every single business is going to be able to afford for that to happen. Most people have a contract with Guard, which if you're a part of a franchise or a large business would cover all your businesses, which would obviously spread the cost across all business. Yeah.
So it won't be a hard and fast law, hey, we're abolishing cash now and we're moving to a central bank digital currency. It will be an incremental thing similar to the pandemic where Gladys Berejiklian stepped up on TV and said words to the effect, life is going to be very difficult for the unvaccinated, or life may become very difficult for people that want to transact using cash.
Impossible. Because you were saying with the bank branches closing, I didn't realize that when they close down a branch, they take their ATMs with them. And that's what actually spurred me on to write that article, is because I live on the Gold Coast. We've had a population explosion, and our business centre during COVID, so there was a whole street that was just full of all the different banks. I'm talking like Bank of Queensland, HSBC, as well as all the big guys. They all disappeared during COVID and they all took their ATMs with them. And that's supposedly the business centre of the Gold Coast with a population of 700,000 people. Oh, the other thing that disappeared from that area was the Australia Post as well.
Yeah, well, you bring this up because one of the arguments to taking away the ATMs and the branches, they're saying, oh, well, you can go to Woolworths and Coles and Aldi and Australia Post to do so. But you write here, however, the other day at my local Woolworths, I counted only 2 cash checkouts with withdrawal facilities and 12 card-only checkouts. We're seeing the same scenario play out at Coles. Many Woolworths stores in metro locations across Australia conducted cashless trials as early as 2020.
Yeah.
As for Australia Post, well, to achieve sustainability goals, oh God, can't stand that saying, it is currently shutting down local branches and creating regional hubs. I mean, this goes back to your chicken and the egg analogy. What happens first? People stop using cash, or people just can't get cash to use?
Yeah. Well, the Australia Post one is, that's particularly irritating. So they no longer anywhere on their website talk about focusing on customer service. It is not a priority for Australia Post anymore. Sustainability is everything. DEI is everywhere. And if you see their new ads on television, they're absolutely nauseating. They've got someone who supposedly in his spare time, in his full Australia Post uniform, goes and collects rubbish off the beach in his spare time. But what they're focusing on is opening what they call regional business centres, because they're focusing, and they admit this, they're focusing on their parcel business because letters are dead, and they don't want, and they don't say this, but they're obviously trying to get rid of the idea that people go to Australia Post for all their services. So a lot of people go there to pay their bills and to transact just in general. And to do, in some regional areas, to do their banking, because it's the only place that's left. And one of the few places that's left to withdraw cash. But they're actually focusing on big, long counters, 2 people on, as opposed to like 7 or 8. And they want you to go there for your parcels only.
Yeah, well, Shane Cordwell wrote this comment in the chat. He said, there's country towns in WA that only have an Australia Post, and they often limit cash withdrawals.
Yeah, that's another insane thing. So you'll often get people at places like Australia Post who will click the cash drawer open and they will count their cash. And a lot of businesses now, their floats in the past, they may have been like 5,000, 2,500, 1,000. They've reduced their floats all the way down for safety to $500. So your ability to withdraw is based on how much cash is in the cash drawer at the Australia Post. But it's interesting that person's from WA, because talking about the Commonwealth Bank, 2 weeks ago, the Commonwealth Bank announced that their biggest bank in Western Australia, Bank West, they're closing all branches and all ATMs. So they are making Bank West in Western Australia 100% online and digital only. based on that 97% figure that I said, which by the way is mostly based in metropolitan areas, because of that 60, 17 are in regional areas, and some of those 17, as your commenter just said with Australia Post, well, in those towns, the Bank West branch is the only bank in town.
I worked, as I said, at the Commonwealth Bank, and this was, probably 20 years ago now. But I think of the old people because they often, but even back then, were using passbooks. A lot of people wouldn't even know what a passbook is, but it's like a little book that keeps all their transactions in there. It's almost like their debit card. They don't have a debit card. They just have this passbook thing, and they actually physically have to go into the branch to be able to withdraw or transact. What happens to these elderly people that are still on these passbooks? And you may make the argument that that's dying out, but where do they go? Especially if they are in small towns and they don't have any other branches around. How do they get access to their money? I know blokes that I work with that they're in their 60s. One bloke I worked with, he came up to me the other night and he said, "Oh mate, I made a huge breakthrough the other night." He said, "I just worked out how to copy and paste on the computer." So this is the extent of their knowledge, right?
Yes.
How are they going to jump online and do banking?
Look, it's very real. And along with the Bank West announcement, there was also an announcement from 7-Eleven, who we all know have the convenience stores, but they also have petrol stations. 700 outlets across Australia, 0 ATMs. So that's important because what has often been the backup for Australia, if you can't get it from Australia Post or the bank, is you have to go to somewhere like 7-Eleven and they'll charge you a $2.50 fee for every withdrawal. But even the private ATMs are being shut down. When it comes to like elderly people and disabled people, I'm not sure how, if someone's still at the stage where they're learning to cut and paste, this is, I don't know, it's very sad. It is very sad. But more to the point, often people will bring up the elderly when they talk about the closing of ATMs and branches. But I think it's scary for all of us. I just cannot imagine a world where I can't just pop around the corner and get cash. I think it is really critically important for us to be able to have some sort of like physical form of exchange that we can hold in our hand and that we own and that we can decide what we're going to do with it. And it is outside of a third party, whether that's a bank or a government, because this is part of what it is, as you were saying before, to be a free and sovereign individual. If they take away our access to cash and to our money, they're actually taking away our freedoms, because the control shifts from the control still in a small way exists, that if I don't like the bank, or if something happens, or if I get nervous, I go get my money, I get it out and I own it and it's in my hand. And then I can do what I want with that. In the future, the ability to physically hold and your physical assets, it's not possible. It's all digital.
I've put the link in the chat again. If anyone wants to call in, as I said in the beginning, we do love our feedback from everyone watching. Tony's written that she wants someone to tell her to stop commenting so much. But Tony, you need to comment. I mean, it's very important that we hear some feedback during these discussions. But we're talking about what's happening here in Australia. But you've brought up what's happening overseas in the United Kingdom and Europe, and you said there are some newly opened Aldi stores across the UK and Europe that require you to scan a digital QR code with embedded digital ID tracking to enter the store. These stores are entirely autonomous with no shop assistance, and cash is not accepted. Like, what the actual F? Like, when I read that, I'm like, what the dystopian future are we heading towards?
Yeah, I wish that I'd sent you the link. What's really interesting is when I first wrote that article, which was not so long ago, I had a link in the article to a video on YouTube showing that. That video has been taken down and you can only view it on Rumble, which is very strange when you consider that this is a private business. This is not about conspiracy theory. This is actually something that happens now. So if you can just imagine that you've got the doors, you actually have to have one of the Audi codes, which I'm sure will be interchangeable with digital ID. You have to scan it in order to get entry to the store, and then you scan it again in order to move through these secure glass turnstiles, which block you from getting in. And then once you're in the store, you're obviously monitored throughout the entire process. And then you get to the registers. Again, you're highly monitored. And you actually, right now, you still have to go through the process of swiping all the barcodes of the item and then charging it to your account. But what they're hoping for in the next couple of years is once you get the item off the shelf and you put it in your trolley or you put it directly into your bag, the cameras, there's so many cameras, they've already read it and they've already taken the price of that bread or that milk out of your bank account as you're putting it in your bag, so that people don't have to worry about the inconvenience of scanning their items as they leave the store. It's so much of this stuff is in the name of convenience, which does my head in, because I think we live in such a easy world compared to our grandparents, and it's like how freaking easy do you want things to get? Like, it's just insane.
Cool.
But yeah, please, maybe I'll send you the link to that. It's extraordinary to the extent that you think, oh, that can't be happening now, but of course it is. So all new Aldi stores across Europe and the UK are going to look like this.
And of course, to have this digital ID to be able to get into the store, they need you to sign up, give your personal details, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and then they sell that on to third parties, and I mean, this is
what
it's all
these
about.
Big departments. So when we're talking about the digital ID, I looked at the sponsors and the people who are interested in this, and it's the Commonwealth Bank, it's the National Australia Bank, it's Woolworths, it's Coles, So they're all in because they want. Well, ultimately, everybody wants a piece of the data pie, and if it's free, you know what the saying is: if it's free, you're the product, and that is the case here. And while in the past it has been anonymous, the future, nothing's going to be anonymous. Even if you're signing up for social media, you still have to register.
Well, you write on your article, the ability of governments to track where their citizens are spending every dollar in their broader economy gives them extraordinary powers. When people use cash instead, that data cannot be captured or subsequently profited by selling it to third parties. Now, this is moving into nicely, it's nicely in terms of this discussion, but not nicely in reality, of it. This digital ID legislation that passed the Senate just a couple of days ago. Now, I've heard that it was adjourned in the lower house. I haven't had that confirmed. I'm just going off anecdotal information there, but it seems like it did go to the lower house. But the pushback that the government received just by passing the Senate was so overwhelming that hopefully that's put pressure on the government not to push this digital ID through. I know Katie Gallagher, and we were talking about her a lot, but she seems to be the number one swamp creature at the moment. This is the post that she made on her Facebook account, celebrating that the digital ID had passed. But the funny thing is, she's turned off the comments because the overwhelming backlash that she received from this was so overwhelming that she had to hide it. But if you can still click on the shares, and if you look at all the shares, it's just endless people going, what the hell is going on? Like, how can you do something like this? And you can even head to X, where her post is still up. I'll bring it up in a second, but the comments there are the same thing. People going, what is this? We don't want this. Again, as I said before, when do these things ever go to an election? When are they ever taken to the people? When do we ever get to vote on whether we want a digital ID or not? We don't. I can't imagine anyone wanting this. Like, they talk about convenience. Oh, we better get that one off the screen. Sorry. It went live. I can't edit that out, but
That's the good thing about being live, isn't it?
but it shows the anger.
Yeah, look, when you said we might be talking about this, I just a few thoughts immediately came to my head. One was first of all, who asked for this?
No one.
I mean, is there do you have discussions with friends, or do you hear family or people saying, "Look, I just really wish that the government knew everything about me and could track me and created this one app where they could literally control every aspect of my life." No one's asking for this.
That brings up a very good point. I wanted to ask you this because when we interviewed you on the X candidates, you said previously you were far left. That was your way of thinking. If you were still there, if you still had that mindset, how would you evaluate this digital ID legislation? Or maybe how do some of your friends or former friends evaluate this digital ID? Are they pushing back on it just as much? Because we know with the climate change argument, the right will say climate change is a scam, but the left will say, no, we need to do it to save the planet. So you can see that there's a clear divide. But on digital ID, are the left really calling for this? And we say the left. I mean, the Liberal Party was the party that introduced this originally.
Yeah.
And Labor's just pushing it through now. But I'm just interested, is there a political divide on this? Or do you think everyone just looks at it and goes, why do we need this? It's not necessary. And it can be more dangerous than any benefits of convenience that they try and spout.
I think potentially there is there is a divide, and I think again, I know I've gone on about this a lot, but I think it does go back to COVID, and the idea that it's going to bring additional safety safeguards. It's going to be secure. And it's going to benefit society. And also within that is the idea that it's going to be convenient. And look, I did, as part of my research, I looked at the advertising for the New South Wales digital ID, which is they're hoping to roll out at the end of this year, but has hit actually a couple of speed bumps along the way, which is good to hear. But in that advertising, they say the phrase puts you in control 8 times. 8 times they say puts you in control. It's your choice. They say that phrase 8 times. It's insane. It's like programming. It's incredible. 7 times they say safe. The word safe is said 7 times. Privacy is said 7 times, and convenient 5 times. And the other thing is share with who you want. But what's really interesting is that they're also programming people within that advertising to be prepared for a return to COVID time. So they're showing people showing their ID, which is green, by the way, which is a bit triggering for me, as they're just entering a bar, a club, a gym. It's like, wow, look at this. You know, you have to show your ID to get in everywhere. Look how easy it is. But why is that even necessary? And
it's funny you say that, because I'm bringing it up again, how I used to work at the bank, and that was the thing. You would ask for someone's ID to verify that was the right person that you were speaking to. So many people would push back on that. Why do I need to show you ID? They don't like feeling like they're a criminal or they're a bad person. They want to be able to walk into somewhere like a bank or anything and feel like they're an honorable person, and that there's no possible way that they would be engaging in any nefarious activities. People don't like being asked for ID. They're very resistant to it. So I can understand the pushback on this digital ID, because you're going to have a central hub of where all your information is going to be stored, and we know the government's useless whenever they look at the federal COVID app that they brought in that didn't even work. I can only imagine that people will hate this.
I don't know what's going on with the Australian public, to be honest, because one of the things that I will say that the left have done around this issue in particular is that anyone that criticizes it is a conspiracy theorist. And that is, that's just, I guess that's their standard rebuff to everything now, is to shame people for even thinking that this might not be a good idea. But we need to remember that this was tried in 1985 under Bob Hawke.
Yes.
They tried to bring in, I don't know what they called it. It was,
I'm pretty sure it was the Australia card.
okay. And it was this idea about centralizing all your ID, all your information, everything into one place. And it was kind of pushed back on mostly by people on the left. And I believe they were using immigration as a way to justify bringing in, because we need to know who everyone is all the time. But Justice Michael Kirby pushed back at the time. And if I can just read out what he said, he said, the establishment of an ID card system bears the risk of incremental overreach, transforming a tool meant for efficiency into a mechanism for surveillance and control. So that's a Supreme Court justice in 1985. And yet here we are, like 30, 40 years later, and people seem to again have forgotten about that. And so the point I'm saying is that was the mainstream view back then in 1985. If we let them do this, they're going to use it and they're going to incrementally take away our freedoms, and it's going to become a tool for surveillance and control. So it hasn't always been conspiracy theory to say these things. And to your point earlier, I think that's a really good point when you were saying that we never got asked. It's extraordinary to me that they would ask the Australian public, as they should, about the voice, gay marriage, and yet this thing that they're introducing, which is basically going to restructure eventually or very quickly the banking system, but not only that, the whole of society potentially, and we don't even get to vote on it. Not only that, when it passed in the Senate, they weren't even allowed to debate it.
Yeah. Yep.
There was no debate allowed. It's just insanity, right? Like this is actually quite huge. And they're talking about doing it in 4 phases, but those 4 phases occur over 2 years. So in my article, I wrote that they want to roll it all out and finalize it by 2030. I think I got that wrong. I think they're actually, they seem to be in a rush to get it through probably by 2025, 2026. Yeah. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, I mean, this is what it's all about.
Okay, good. No, because I'm just aware that sometimes I do just go on a bit of a rant.
I was just reading this comment by Pauline. She says voluntary in quotes, but you won't have access to certain services. No, bells are ringing in my head. I mean, that reminds me of the back in the pandemic when you were unvaccinated, or you can be unvaccinated. You're not forced to be vaccinated, but if you do decide to be unvaccinated, then you won't be able to go to your retail shop, and you won't be able to go to sporting events, and you won't be able to go to the gym, and you won't be able to live in a civilized society because everyone else wants to be on board, but you don't. It's the same thing. They'll bring this stuff in. They'll say it's voluntary. You don't have to sign up to it. But if you don't sign up to it, now you can't access certain services.
Look, there's so much to say to that. I want to start out by saying that the Swamp Monster, in one of her interviews around, I love that, in one of her interviews around this exact topic about it being voluntary, smirked. And I'm just like a huge believer in reading people's like non-verbals.
Yes.
And that was very telling, because I don't think that it was a deliberate thing. But
she's a giveaway.
I know why she's smart.
I thought, I can't remember where I saw it now, but was watching that clip that I showed before. The way that her body language just gave it away. It just gave away. She can't hide it, that Katie Gallagher. She can't hide it at all.
No. And her being, if she's the minister that's in charge, it's in the legislation that it is at her discretion. So there's there is actually a bit of criticism because it says that the scope and the timing of the different phases will be exclusively at the minister's discretion. So to think that there's some sort of like democratic rollout of this thing where there's going to be a committee or even, I don't know, people without interest or people debating whether we should take it a bit further, take it even further. No, there's no debate. It's up to her. Getting back to what the commenter was saying, biometric data is already being collected by MyGov because they've actually already rolled out their own digital ID. And there was legislation that was passed at the end of last year. So they're now asking people to go to MyGov to take a selfie to prove they are who they say they are. So that's now part of it.
We've interviewed on the ex-candidates, we've interviewed Rebecca Lloyd twice, so go back and watch that interview. She talks about the director ID, which is for companies. That's already rolled out. That's already in place. I mean, companies were being faced with fines already for not signing up to it. So that's already.
But if you want like child payments, if Medicare, Centrelink, it's not voluntary, because if you want those essential services, it will very quickly require you to have the digital ID. The other thing, if you're looking at it from a business perspective, like you're saying before, private businesses cannot currently join the system, which I found that quite interesting. That's directly from the bill. But yet big businesses, like I said earlier, NAB and Commonwealth Bank, Australia Post, are already almost embedded within the ID itself. The other thing that's quite interesting is fees for participating, so that's businesses that want to participate, have not been set or even discussed. There's also no provisions for responses to cybersecurity and digital ID fraud. And so they don't actually, there's nothing written into this that says if the system or whatever gets hacked, this is going to be the response. If an individual gets hacked and their ID gets stolen, this is what we will do. There's no provision for that. So again, this comes back to like they're really rushing this through.
Yes. Well, that gets me to my final question. But before I get there, Patricia's put a comment in the chat. She said, the live stream is deleting comments instantaneously, censorship everywhere. So I can't see that. But according to Patricia, apparently there's some comments in the chat that Facebook must be wiping straight away. But this leads me. You said that they're rushing this through. They're pushing this through. There's an agenda there, seemingly, and this whole discussion has been on attacks of individual sovereignty, and we saw that in its most glaring form during the COVID pandemic. And the COVID pandemic was the lead up to the 2019 presidential election. Or was it the 2020 presidential election? We're heading very quickly towards the next US presidential election. Do you suspect something on the horizon that needs to happen before we get to that election, potentially?
Do you mean, do I think that they're planning something?
Well, I mean,
there's a lot of
Donald Trump leading the polls, and he was leading the polls before the pandemic, and then the pandemic magically came along. Do you suspect that we could be in store for something?
Yeah, I mean, there was chatter that started in the kind of conspiracy circles, which has started to kind of seep into more mainstream views. And that's this idea that there is going to be some sort of event. And a lot of people are actually saying that either the internet itself or sections of the internet is going to be shut down. But people are also talking about all of these online censorship bills that are being passed very, very quickly as another way to kind of shut things down. But I have heard that there's going to be a huge push for mail-in votes again. They really want to be able to construct some sort of narrative, or to potentially, as you're kind of alluding to, have something happen that is going to result in large numbers of people choosing to submit their vote via the post. And I don't understand how America still has that mail-in voting is legal in America. I mean, again, they'll say, well, it's in America, they say it's conspiracy theory, but yet it's just common practice in most countries across the world to ban mail-in voting, because it's the system that is most open to corruption and fraud for completely obvious reasons. So the fact that they still allow that, and they're almost encouraging people to choose that voting mechanism, is deeply alarming. But yes, I've heard the chatter that there is something big coming. I hope it's wrong, but
well,
yeah.
mate, we're staring down the barrel of a US election, a UK election, potentially maybe an Australian election. There's a Queensland election. There's council elections. This is going to be a massive year, a huge year. And look, hopefully we can get you back on the show as a regular contributor or host to talk, because we're going to have a lot to talk about. But for now, how can people follow you with everything that you're doing? I do want to encourage everyone to just type in Victor DL and Spectator Australia, where you can read both your articles there. And hopefully next time we speak to you, there'll be even more articles. But if people want to follow you day to day, how do they do that?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in still making things affordable and accessible to people. So I really I encourage people to go and hopefully click the links to the Spectator and to the Brownstone Institute as well. But if money is an issue, I do, after the articles have had a good run on the website, I do post them for free on my Substack, which I created only very recently. So you may not have the link for that. But again, it's just my name, which is Victor, and then Dalziel is Dalziel. If you do type me into search engine, it will come up pretty quickly. A lot of people were saying to me, don't use that name because it's very unusual and people aren't going to remember it. But the good thing about having an unusual name with a V and a Z is it comes up fairly quickly when you do search for it. But I'm also available on Twitter, and I do have my, as you mentioned at the outset, my podcast on Rumble, and it's all literally just my name again. That's the one. Yeah.
Yep, and I do encourage people also check out Victor's podcast. There's some really great interviews on there with some really notable doctors and professors and academics, and also some guy named Stephen Tripp, which seemingly has the most views there for some reason. But you check out Victor's podcast. It is a really good podcast, and you have some really, I mean, they're not some of these academics and professionals that you have on your podcast are not super well known. They're not on mainstream media all the time. So I think that's even more important to check out your podcast to hear their views, because you're giving them a platform to get their information out there.
Yeah, I try to, obviously I can be a little bit selfish. I generally get people on who have spoken on or written about topics that I'm interested in. And I'll have a good chat to them. But yeah, they're everyday people just like us. So it's great to have them on and to talk about some controversial stuff, and generally issues that the mainstream will just not have anything to do with. And that's one of the few perks of being banned from YouTube, is it's I can talk about whatever I like.
Yep, that's right.
No constraints.
So just to finish up, in light of everything that we've discussed tonight, is there any hope you can give people, or any guidance on how to push back against this stuff? I always say you should be emailing your local politicians, and also, the Katie Gallagher post where she had to limit the comments was a clear example. Get on their get on their social media and let your voice be known there as well. I mean, there are ways for people to push back and hopefully stop a lot of this legislation. What's your recommendations for people?
Well, there is a couple of online petitions that are going around right now directly in relation to the digital ID bill. So perhaps we can link to that. I think for the guy from South Australia, Antich.
Alex
And-
Antic. Yeah.
Yeah. His online petition has got close to 140,000 signatures. So I would recommend people go and sign that. And the other thing, if you're looking for a little bit of hope, we mentioned the MyGov ID, which is already available, and they're kind of forcing people onto. Well, they've had to kind of pause a large. They were going to push forward with that a lot more. But I just read just before I came on that in 2023, fraudsters created fake accounts, and which led to $557 million in losses over the past 2 years. So, you know, and look, I can go on and on about all across the world, all the different governments that have been hacked, but it's stories like that, and it's bringing that brings me a little bit of hope, because they have to slow down, because honestly, like, looking at what hackers and fraudsters want, what they want is government databases, because it brings the biggest bang for the buck. And until they can sort that out, this stuff will hopefully be slow. The other thing I will quickly say is that in New South Wales, the digital ID has gone through multiple pilots in 2022 and 2023, which were kind of failures. So yeah, sign the petition, keep hope, keep pushing back, keep using cash, and yeah, stay community minded. Follow people like Stephen and us. We'll keep you updated, and yeah.
Yes, definitely. And you're talking about hackers. I mean, if you're going to put everything on a centralized platform, what's to stop foreign countries from hacking into it?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
It's a huge security risk.
They're already in, I have to say.
Yeah.
It's certainly the US would be, if not China as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, Victor, I love having you on. Your wealth of knowledge and research. I really appreciate you sharing everything that you've looked into with the audience and with me. So hopefully we can have you back in the future. For everyone watching, thank you for watching. Thank you for commenting. Hopefully we can get some callers next time. I do like to when the callers call in. But thank you everyone for watching. Head to Buy Me a Coffee if you want to throw some dollars there. That would be much appreciated. And also buy the t-shirt. I'm going to get some myself. So now that the merchandise shop is up and running, we'll be adding more designs. But head there. All that stuff will be in the links in the show notes. So please support us. And we'll be back next week with some more, hopefully, important information. So happy Easter, everyone. Happy Easter to you, Victor. Hope you have a good weekend. And thank you, everyone, for watching. See you all next time. Bye.